Welcome to the LRQA Supply Chain video podcast series with Professor Richard Wilding, one of the world's leading supply chain experts. This episode is the first in a series which covers the key elements of global supply chain strategy.
Hello, I'm Professor Richard Wilding. I'm Professor of Supply Chain Management at Cranfield School of Management. Cranfield School of Management is one of the top European business schools, and at Cranfield our whole philosophy is about getting knowledge into practice. Everybody has an idea of what a supply chain is, and for different companies supply chains will be different. I often get people to think about, when you hear the term supply chain, often people immediately think about lorries and warehouses. This is probably because most lorries you see have supply chain written down the side of them. Of course, that is only one small aspect of managing a supply chain. In fact, if we look at a definition of a supply chain, simple definition would be out of the ground and back into the ground. It's actually moving material out of the ground and back into it. So when you think about any product, we have to produce that product. But also now we're having to consider actually recycling that product as well and getting it back into the ground. Okay, so are supply chains something new? Well, actually no. If you go to your Bible, you will find the story of Joseph. Now, Joseph, I guess we could define as one of the first supply chain managers. He worked for Pharaoh in Egypt. He managed a series of warehouses during the years of plenty. He was able to stock up this warehouse, and then he actually managed the distribution of food and so on and so forth out across the nations at that time. So if we look at supply chain, the supply chain concept is something which we've always had in societies. Modern supply chains, of course, are slightly more complex. Modern supply chains extend, well, all around the world. We're finding that we're buying products from nations such as China, Vietnam. We're in a global economy. So one of the challenges we now have in terms of managing supply chains is really their global reach. So all organisations have supply chain. The purpose of a supply chain is really to create value, and that is the key thing that we're trying to do. When we then start thinking about managing the supply chain, what is supply chain management all about? A definition I like to use is that supply chain management is all about the management of relationships. It's relationships with your customers, your suppliers. In fact, all these people who touch the product and take it through. And why do we have those relationships? It's all about adding value and also doing it at a less total cost to everybody. So if we can manage supply chains correctly, we can manage our relationships with all these various parties correctly, but also when we do that well, we can actually reduce cost overall for everybody in the supply chain. As I've mentioned, supply chains add value. So what do I mean by that? The point is now that generally the individual product, just supplying a product, is just the qualifier. It's people buy the product. Most products are becoming commoditized in their nature. They're not really very, very special in terms of what you're buying. If you're buying an MP3 player, of course there's some big brands, but an MP3 player as such is just a commodity. So what differentiates those brands? Well, for many situations, one thing that can differentiate the brand is your service, for example. How do you serve the customer? And the supply chain is responsible for service. Is your product available? There's no point in having a great brand if your product is not available to actually buy off the shelf. And the supply chain is responsible for ensuring that that item is on the shelf.
Thank you for watching the LRQA Supply Chain video podcast series. To download any of the episodes, visit www.lrqa.com.